This past week, I went to my first Pirates game with folks from the church. The Pirates were playing the Houston Astros. Many of you know that I am from Houston. And so, of course, I showed up in an Astros jersey, a little confidence, maybe a humble expectation that my team would do what they usually do for a team in first place: win. I figured it'd be a nice evening, a casual outing where my new Pittsburgh friends could get a glimpse of what championship caliber baseball actually looks like. But the baseball gods had other plans. People of God, the Pirates pitcher, Mike Burrows, he has been struggling this year. He took to the mound. The reality is he's the kind of guy you root for, but you don't bet on him, let's say. And then he threw a shutout. The game was 3-0. Astros lost, and it was Mr. Burrows' first win as a starter. Even the Pirates fans were surprised. But who'd have thunk it? The least likely pitcher of the night delivered the biggest performance. It's a lesson for me, and probably for many of us, that we should never underestimate the least likely. We should never underestimate the least likely, because that is exactly who the Spirit loves to move through. In our scripture today, from the book of Acts, we're told that it is 50 days after Passover. It's a Jewish festival called the Feast of Weeks. This festival is underway, and it's celebrating the giving of the Torah to Moses. And so you can imagine that Jerusalem is packed with pilgrims. But the disciples of Jesus, they're not celebrating. And we should understand why. After Jesus' resurrection and ascension, his followers were not running through the streets with much confidence. They were not performing miracles or building any churches just yet. The reality is, they were still overcome with great fear. Fear that caused them to hide, locking themselves in the upper room. People of God, they had no idea who to trust or what would come next. The disciples were afraid like we sometimes are afraid. People in our community today are afraid of potential unemployment due to tariffs and grant funding cuts. Families, including seniors, are afraid. They are being priced out of their homes and forced to find new housing with less than 30 days' notice. In an Illinois McDonald's 2 weeks ago, a woman was beaten up, assaulted, because a couple of assailants took offense to her using the women's restroom. People of God, people are afraid of being attacked on account of how they present their gender, for simply being who they are. People are afraid. And all across this great nation of ours, there are immigrant children who are afraid that their guardians, citizens and non-citizens alike, will not come home from work. They have fears that their parents might be detained and disappeared by governmental agencies. And regardless of one's immigration status, people are afraid, and rightly so. Responding to ICE's unjust and non-Christ-like action of tearing families apart in the day and the night, you may have read about the Los Angeles protesters who are exercising their First Amendment rights to gather and protest the government's actions. The protests against unjust raids were met not with dialogue, but with force. Tear gas, flashbang grenades, And late last night and early this morning, I read that the California National Guard was activated by our president. And media outlets are reporting that within 24 hours, a certain number of military troops will engage in the policing of civilians in Los Angeles. A move that California's governor and local officials say is not needed. It's a provocative escalation, my friends. But is it to keep peace and protect people? Or is it to suppress people's voices, including those people of faith? People who want to speak out for justice and compassion and basic human decency. Is it to keep peace? Or is it to rule with an iron fist and instill more fear among those deemed the least likely? People of God, I fear that this is the face of empire. Empire does not like it when the powerless speak up, and so empire cracks down. And that's exactly what Rome tried to do with the earliest followers of Jesus. Rome cracked down. They cracked down with troops because the empire always sends troops. And the empire always tries to extinguish the spirits before it spreads. But in Acts chapter 2, we read that the Spirit of God does not wait for permission. The Spirit of God, she crashes into this locked upper room like wind, ignites tongues of fire, and speaks through the most unexpected individuals. And then suddenly, pilgrims outside, people from every nation, hear the voice of God in their own language, their own mother tongue. I hope that we can see that God resists the narrow-mindedness found in the idea that we all need to speak one government-approved tongue. And in fact, God refuses to be confined to one language or one race or one power structure. And the Spirit speaks every dialect of dignity and meets people with the voice of love and the language of their own hearts. My friends, Pentecost tells us that the Spirit is not afraid of empire. Spirit is not intimidated by Rome's power, and she does not ask for permission. She shows up exactly where the least likely individuals are being silenced, and the Spirit of God speaks through them. What a scandalous thing, my friends. Scandalous, because God was not supposed to speak through people like them. The disciples were not prophets. They were not kings or queens. They were not theologians. They were not the elites or those folks with polished spiritual resumes. They were the least likely. They fished. They were laborers and farm workers. They were peasants, outcast. Some were tax collectors. They were women, and they were marginalized. Exactly the kind of people most would overlook then, and so many of us overlook now. And in Acts, this was a new thing, people of God. We read that Peter quotes the prophet Joel, and he says, quote, "In the last days, I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh." And he goes on to say, "Even upon slaves, people of all genders. Your children shall have visions, and your elders shall prophesy." My friends, in other words, in the reign of God, everyone gets to be a vessel for the divine. How scandalous this is. How scandalous that God erases the boundaries that we cling to for control. Categories like gender and class, like nationality or age, And the Spirit lifts people up, and she breaks through our fears of not feeling worthy or good enough. She breaks through our fears of not being spiritual enough. She breaks through our fears of not feeling prepared enough. People of God, I believe that in these last days, the Spirit of God is moving. In our time, we throw around the phrase, the last days, like it's always some cosmic disaster movie. Wars, fire, collapse, all the drama therein. The last days, this phrase, it brings terror to some of us, and to others of us, we roll our eyes. We encounter billboards, even here in Pittsburgh, that say, "Are you right with God? The day of judgment is near. Are you going to heaven or are you going to hell?" And our binary understanding of how God operates puts us in a box, and it forces us to falsely choose either this or that. But when Peter stands up in the book of Acts and he says, "These are the last days," he does not refer to this or to that. He's not talking about heaven or to hell. He is not referencing a paradise or even eternal destruction. But Peter is talking about renewal. Some might even say liberation. There was a time when people thought that the last days would be filled with divine judgments and the boogeyman and wrath, and God was going to pay back all of our enemies. But Peter says that now, these last days are about the Spirit being poured out on all people. The last days are about God being poured out, not God punishing. And so we have to wonder, my friends, how do we tune in to this true Pentecost experience, especially when so many of us need it in our lives? As I look around, as I think back to those I love, my friends and family members, I know that there are many of us in the least likely category. Why do we struggle to embody the divine, embody the Spirit in our own life? My friends, sometimes I wonder, yes, the Spirit descends like a dove, and the Spirit descends with tongues of fire upon us, and maybe the Spirit is being poured out in other ways. Maybe the Spirit comes from within. Contemplative theologians, participants in our meditation group, and those who are involved in our Taizé service, they've learned this, that when we quiet the chaos outside of us, and when we still ourselves long enough, the voice of God is not thundering from the heavens, but it's whispering from within. Thomas Burton says that, quote, "We cannot be happy for too long unless we are in contact with the springs of spiritual life that are hidden in the depth of our own soul." The hard truth for conservatives and for progressive Christians, I believe, is that we often silence that inner spiritual voice ourselves. And we do it not because we are bad people. We do it because we have absorbed false stories about who we are, about what we deserve, and what we think God is actually like. And some of us are stuck in stories that say we are too late, too broken, too unworthy. And some of us, even now, we might be still blaming others. And some of us might be blaming ourselves for how things have turned out. And I think that some of us expect judgment from God because we have judged ourselves so harshly for oh so long. But friends, why would God need to judge us when we do enough of that all on our own? People of God, Pentecost turns these last days upside down. It's not about who deserves the Spirit, but who actually needs it. And if your soul is tired this morning, if your life feels like it's falling to pieces, then you are precisely the kind of individual that God's Spirit has come to ignite. Maybe you find yourself in the least of these categories, like the Pittsburgh Pirates. Maybe you find yourself in the least likely category, like the earliest followers of Jesus. And maybe today is your Pentecost moments. You can keep waiting for judgments, but friends, the Spirit is here with mercy. You can still expect condemnation, but God is here speaking everlasting love. And you can expect a closed door if you wish. But God wants, dare I say, to break it wide open. And just when you think it is all over, God says, let us begin again. The miracle of Pentecost is that people who were waiting for punishments, all of a sudden they found themselves filled with spiritual power. I wonder if that's our invitation today. The invitation to stop waiting for judgments, to stop asking for permission, to stop believing the lie that you are too broken, too late, too much, or that you are not enough. My friends, the Spirit has already chosen those in the least likely category. And that means she's chosen you. May it be so.